Get into this conversation now. Impeached former public protector turned member of parliament, Advocate Mkhwebane, is under fire after she claimed Indian people were persecuting her. She made the remarks on social media shortly after the Supreme Court of Appeal described her recent application for an appeal bid as, quote-unquote, dead on arrival. Parliament has condemned her remarks, describing them as regrettable. Let's speak now to Cosatu's Tony Ehrenreich, who talks to us from Cape Town this evening. Mr. Ehrenreich, good evening to you and thank you for your time. What is Cosatu's stance on the former public protector's remarks, particularly around Indian people?
Well, Cosatu is shocked and outraged. Effectively, what the member of parliament had said is tantamount to hate speech. And we hope that the National Prosecuting Authority had acquainted themselves to the new hate speech law and that this will be used to take drastic action against MP Mkhwebane, because this is not the kind of conduct that we expect from members of parliament. This is not how our leaders should conduct themselves. This is certainly not acceptable. We've seen throughout the world, whether it's been in South Africa, Zimbabwe, America, Germany, Israel and Palestine, that issues of race has led to many people being killed. And for leaders of our society to act in such an inflammatory manner just because the due process in law does not favor their interest is completely unacceptable. As Cosatu, we urge the National Prosecuting Authority and Parliament to take strong action against MP Mkhwebane, because we've got to send a signal to the whole of society that we will not tolerate hate crimes based on race or anything else, and we will take steps against those who make themselves guilty of it. So we're outraged by these comments, and we hope that decisive action is taken to stop this kind of behavior at the most senior levels in government, but certainly across all of the levels in our society.
You talk about Parliament. Here's what they had to say today, and I quote now: "As an MP and a public representative who owes allegiance to our Constitution, Advocate Mkhwebane has a responsibility to uphold and protect the values enshrined in the Constitution, which are the cornerstone of our democracy." What kind of action do you expect of Parliament to take, therefore?
Well, if we just look at internationally what the consequences are of these kind of inflammatory statements, we've seen Herzegovina, we've seen Rwanda, and for leaders of South Africa who should be sensitive to the difficult racial history that South Africa has, and to undermine entirely the value system that's advocated by the Freedom Charter is completely unacceptable for a leader in government. Now, the MP may not have been involved in the struggle in 1955 when the Congress of the People came together, and the representatives of the Indian community and all of our communities who looked forward to a democratic South Africa where race would not play a part on discriminatory behavior. That was the cornerstone of the democratic project in South Africa. For an MP to act against that is completely unacceptable. We feel that this should really disqualify MP Mkhwebane from representing the people of South Africa at such a high level. She's disgraced herself in her conduct, and we feel that decisive action should be taken by Parliament and by the National Prosecuting Authority to account to the highest extent of the law, because we can't whitewash this kind of conduct by senior members of Parliament who seeks to undermine the very policy for their own personal interest. This is the kind of behavior that should disqualify you immediately from representation, but it's also dangerous behavior in a country battling with so many challenges that we have as we undo the legacy of discrimination in our country.
It's also important to take notice of the fact that we constantly refer to her as advocate. She is an officer of the court. And here is what Judges Matter, which is an organization that concerns itself with the conduct of the judiciary. They are saying it's particularly disappointing to see this attack on the judiciary coming from an advocate of the High Court who is bound by the ethical code of the Legal Practice Council. In your view, do you think that the legal bodies that exist in the country should sit up and take notice here? And if so, what kind of responsibility do they have when an officer of the court behaves in this fashion and, in particular, attacking judges?
Absolutely agree with the Legal Practices Council to take action against this member of parliament in the capacity as a legal officer, a qualified attorney who should know that the tenets of ethics preclude you from making these kind of rash statements. So we think action should be taken by the Legal Professions Council. The Judicial Services Commission should look into this matter. The NPA should look into this matter. The Hawk should investigate it thoroughly. But also members of parliament have a responsibility and a duty to ensure that their fellow members act in keeping with what the Constitution prescribes. Advocate Mkhwebane is clearly acting outside of the framework of the Constitution. In fact, her conduct and her behavior on this particular issue violates one of the most important principles that the Constitution upholds for South Africans, given our history. This, in our view, immediately should disqualify her from eligibility to represent our people at the highest level. But we'd be happy that due process be followed by all of the relevant institutions to hold members of parliament and members of any other leadership position in our country to account in the event of these kind of completely unacceptable statements that poses a risk to our fragile and tenuous democracy.
Finally, what should the leadership of the EFF be saying tonight?
Well, the parties must take responsibility for the conduct of their MPs. An MP just doesn't arrive at parliament. They arrive there by virtue of a process in political parties, and the political parties should hold their representatives to account. So this is another step that has to be taken to attend to this matter. But I think what we found and what we'll see in the society as a whole, besides the institutions that have now spoken out against conduct, unacceptable and racist conduct, that the institutions must now take decisive action against her, and amongst that action must be to disqualify her from leadership at such a high level in Parliament, because Parliament should be the custodian of the Constitution, and all of the members should be acquainted with the obligation that arises to them out of their pledge to Parliament. And if they then don't uphold that pledge, well, then they've disqualified themselves from representation at that higher level. But we feel decisive action must be taken so that we send a clear signal to the whole of the country that we're not going to tolerate this kind of racial and racist conduct. We've seen it in many instances where the kind of old Boer mentality is being exposed in our communities, and we must, as we have, take decisive action against that. But this must be a clear signal that we'll take decisive action against anybody guilty of racism or trying to generate amongst different sections of the South African society. Our job, the job of our members in Parliament, what our Constitution enjoins us to do, is to unite our people and make sure that we build this country in where we can live together in peace, but that everybody can prosper out of the benefits and the opportunities in South Africa.
Tony Ehrenreich is a leader of Cosatu. Thank you very much for your time.